Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Bald Explorer live stream, a reading of a vintage book and various comments about it, and also shared knowledge from the audience. Hello, I'm Richard Vobes. Welcome along. It's Monday, the 1st of June, as I record this. You're very welcome to join me live or after the event. Either way is good for me. So hello to people out there in the stream. We've got Turbo Stream, AOP, afternoon. Nice to see you there, Adrian. Ben Reeve, afternoon. He said he saw BBC4's Golden Age of Canals last night, had footage of Tom Rolt from the previous book reading. Oh, how interesting. Because I can't watch that now. I haven't got a TV license. Turbo Stream says, I think I've seen that. I do like to know what an author looks like. H.V. Morton with his hat on reminds me of Peter Sellers in The Pink Panther. Yeah, that's true. I think it's one of those series that the BBC replay a few times. I'm sure they do. Anyway, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for coming along. It's another week, isn't it? It's sunny again in the Shires. Yes, I've been out and I've been filming. I've got the last part of this little walk that I've been doing from Hangleton to Edberton on the edit suite. Virtually together. I just got some tweaks to put to it, and then I can encode it and upload it ready for tomorrow. So that will be good. But of course, 4 o'clock came along, and here we are. Suddenly thought better get to the studio and quickly turn everything on, make sure it's all working after the weekend, because sort of the studio becomes a bit of a dumping ground during the weekend, where all sort of stuff just gets thrown in, and then I've got to make space again. It is actually a back room. Hello to Graham Roffey, hello to Michael Angel, to Mike Stevens, and to Brian Davis. Good afternoon on this lovely day. I know, I just wish I was sitting outside enjoying some of that lovely sunshine. I've been out in it in the earlier part of the day, but I have actually come in to do some editing, and now this, of course. So it's all good. Anyway, just before we start, a thought that I'm thinking of doing. Where are the others? Oh, I know, they're all... The trouble is, when I was doing it every day, I think people got into the rhythm of it. But I think because it's suddenly after the weekend and the sun is shining, they're all going, oh, we can watch Vobes any old time. I'm thinking of what to do after we get to the end of this book. And this seems to go quite well. Now, whether we should do this not in the afternoon, maybe in the evening would be a better time, perhaps alternate it with the Vogue show. I was just wondering, because there's lots of old books that we can have a bit of fun with, and I do like to have a bit of fun, and it's just turning into a sort of me putting on silly voices and things. I'm wondering whether I should put this on a separate channel so that it does its own thing. So we put the books, rather than on the Bald Explorer. I always have this qualm when there's something that's not the Bald Explorer, if you see what I mean. It's not me out on the walks and stuff. You've got the Vogue show, which is a definite type of thing, a zany, whatever it is. And then this is becoming something different. And I'm just thinking maybe it could go on its own YouTube channel. I know you're starting again with the audience and stuff, but that's okay, because there's a lot of cross promotion, so I don't mind that. Rather than having this live going out on that channel. But it's something I'm thinking about. Hello to lovely Julia. Are there any photos of H.V. Morton? I think there are photos of Morton on Google. If you go on Google Images, don't think about Andrew Cook. It's Arthur Stanley Cook. You should read the introduction to I'm in a Search for England, published by Folio. It's right up your street. Well, I've got that book. It's not here. It's in the other room. I've got that book. I went and I read a bit of that. That was his earlier work. That was Morton's earlier work, which he did about 20 years before this one. It could be probably up my street. Maybe we could read that one. The Bull Jackanory. There you go. There you go. Right. Anyway, so I'll have a chat to Julia, and she's very wise, so I'll see what she thinks. And then, then there's the SMT. Right, I saw 2 Englands. What did I do with them? God knows. Beg pardon? Arthur's Tanya, there you go. Right, we got to, I don't know where, but I remember stopping about here. So we'll see where we are. He is, where the hell is he? I can't remember, but he's somewhere. Salisbury way. Is this right? Are we over in Salisbury? So where am I? Is that right? I'm just looking at the pictures, but the pictures don't relate. Well, maybe they do, to where I put the thing in. Because this is now in this is right. It's chapter 7, isn't it? In the second half. I 2 days and I'm also lost. Yeah, that's right. Here we go. Sorry about that. Love this channel. I really enjoy it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Perhaps the book reading should be a winter thing. Well, yeah, I think you're quite right. I think that may be that's something else to think about as well, actually. Because on days like this, who wants to be inside anyway? So half of what I do is experimental to see what works and what doesn't work. Memories of long ago, indeed, so long ago that they seemed like memories of someone else, assailed me as I saw the wide spaces of the plain in the early morning, the tawny sketches of stubble, wind bent, lying to the edge of the sky, the rabbits scurrying round their burrows, the clouds wheeling above the landscape. Military lorries charged about, full of young men wearing strange garment, known so dramatically by the name of battle dress, a term never coined, surely, by an unemotional British soldier, but by a cinema-going tailor. Now and then the bang of trench mortar sounded from a far hill. Machine guns stammered for a second on distant ranges, and the whole plain was alive. It was 1914 to 18, training the youth of England to defend its birthright. The plain, of course, he's talking about is Salisbury Plain. I saw tanks, Bren gun carriers, and all kinds of queer motor vehicles, some of them specially designed for war, others civilian touring cars in a uniform of camouflage, but every one of them a clear demarcation that the moral sense is unable to keep pace with the inventiveness of mankind. Not clear demarcation, I'm sorry, a clear declaration that the mortal sense is unable to keep pace with the inventiveness of mankind. What would the pioneers of motoring have said at the beginning of the century, those grotesque fur-cladded, goggled figures who steered their coal-fed fires along the roads of England at 15 miles an hour, had they been told that their toys would one day breed a tank, that they were leading the new cavalry charge? Who would have believed, when I was a boy, that the laughable arrangement of struts and strings, known as a flying machine, seen generally in a field surrounded by an amused crowd of cyclists and horsemen, would, within 30 years, conquer the air and give birth to the Wellington bomber? It was different on the plain in the last war, as I remember it. Sitting beside me now in the car was a child with a captain's stars on his shoulders. I see what you mean. Sorry, I thought he literally meant a child. I got slightly confused. Sorry, I'm just going to put this thing. I do want to read books that do not have that glare on them. The glossy paper. So where is it? It was different on the plain in the last war, as I remember it. Sitting beside me now in the car was a child with the captain's stars on his shoulders, who had been detailed to show me round. and to him I confided some of my memories of the plain, the long columns of marching men, the jingling GS wagons with their horses, and the cavalry at squadron drill in the early morning. The child looked at me with the expression of one who sees before him a veteran of Agincourt. Oh, we've got a few more. Hello, Jeff Kellison. Good-looking golf shirt. Thank you very much. This is the Bald Explorer official shirts, by the way. Tally-ho, Richard. Interesting chapter. Yes, here we go. We came to a high, windy hill where we paused for a moment to watch men firing trench mortars. They were NCOs on a course, about 100 of them, a mixed grill, as the colonel described them, and they were in charge of staff instructors, a breed of men more solemn and determined than any other. When they know how to do a thing, it must be done that way and no other. Placing the tip of the left boot half an inch this way makes all the difference to them between orthodoxy and heresy, and no Pope of Rome was ever harder on a heretic. I was glad to see that this breed has not altered, so far as I could judge, since the last war, for it is one of the best breeds in England. The staff instructors loved their mortar. They ran with it to the cover of a dip of ground and then split up. One party sent over a smoke screen while the other plumped trench mortar bombs on an imaginary battery 200 yards ahead. It was well done, and we could follow the bomb through the sky right over the arc, and then we lost it in a burst of flame and dust far off on an unfortunate rabbit warren, which told us where it had fallen. "A lovely spray of shrapnel," said the colonel. "A beautiful little weapon," said the major. "Wish we had 6 to a battalion," said the captain. An officer asked permission to take a photograph of the team in action. The chief staff instructor saw the camera. "Are you going to take a photo, sir?" he asked. "Yes." "Hi, number 1," sang out the staff instructor in a voice of thunder. "Oh, hi, number 1. Not quite sure how he was. "Hi, number 1," sang the staff instructor in a voice of thunder. "Unsling that rifle." He ran up and saluted. "All correct now, sir," he said. "Oh, I see. It's about taking this photograph." "All correct now, sir," he said to the photographer. Then in an aside to me, Can't be too particular, sir. Hitler might see it." We returned to the car to find a beautiful member of the Fanny, the Fany, not quite sure, its driver gazing over the great spaces of the plain, lost in whatever dreams come to members of this oddly misnamed nursery yeomanry during the long absences of their cargoes. The young captain, timidly in the face of such beauty, asserted his presence, and the girl, with a delightful pretence at repentance, sprang out of her reverie to the door, and we were soon on our way across the plain. We came to a place where tanks fire their guns, and I asked to be allowed to travel in one during target practice. The tank chosen for me was a big new cruiser tank, and they told me that you could sit inside perfectly safely while a machine gun sprayed on you. I climbed the armour plates and let myself down, feet foremost, through the steel manhole. I found myself in an armoured straight waistcoat. Although I knew there was not much room in the tank, I was surprised to discover how closely a modern tank is built around the crew. There was literally not an inch of spare room. We were imprisoned in steel. On the level of my feet, as I stood in the commander's turret, was the gunner's head. He sat gazing through the telescopic gun sight, his head pressed into a brow pad, his left hand on the hydraulic turret control, his right hand on the gun triggers. Next to me, on a lower level, stood a man who popped a shell into a gleaming gun breech, which instantly closed, and the gun was ready to be fired. He slipped a loaded belt into a machine gun. When the gun turret and tank were facing in the same direction, I caught a glimpse of our friend, the driver, but at other times, when we swung round, he'd disappeared. The loader closed the turret, and we were in semi-darkness. He took up a hand telephone. The gunner and driver slipped on earphones. Imagine three men almost side by side having to telephone to each other. And then the man with the telephone shouted, "Advance!" Our steel prison was filled with the deepening roar, and the tank began to move with smoothly snaky motion, something between a small boat at sea and a fairground switchback. Looking through the commander's plate glass slit, I saw that we were advancing into a pond. We sank into the water and ploughed our way up on the other side. We were now roaring along at about 15 or 20 miles an hour. The target was on a distant hillside. The gunner held it with his telescopic gun sight by revolving the turret, and no matter how the tank dipped and rose or swayed from side to side, his whole mind was bent on the task of keeping the guns on the target, and the target in the hairline of his sights. "Fire!" shouted the man with the telephone. The gunner pressed the trigger. There was an ear-splitting crack. The shell case shot into the canvas bag. The tank filled with a smell of cordite that was instantly blown out by fans, and on the far side of the hillside the brown earth spat up in front of the target. We were now running past the target. The gun turret kept swinging round to the rear, and 3 times came the crack, and 3 shells plastered the target dead on. The tank suddenly swerved, dipping its nose into a pit, and turning in its own length, began to race back at full speed. I should think that we were travelling at 30 miles an hour now. The guns nosed up, moving independently of the body of the tank, and as we came in view of the target again, the gunner opened up with his machine gun, and a steady stream of bullets splattered up all around it. We performed other evolutions. We roared full speed into a dip of the ground and lay hidden like some prehistoric monster waiting for its prey. Then our guns crept up on the target, and we just had time to see a direct hit before we roared off and away. While all this was going on, what impressed me was the superb teamwork necessary between the members of the crew if a tank is to preserve itself in action. One slack or inefficient member and the tank is in fearful peril, one slack or inefficient member and that tank is in fearful peril with all the lives inside it. The tank is a partially blind and almost totally deaf monster, impregnable against some forms of attack, easily vulnerable to others. And as I saw these men at action stations, I compared them for courage and interdependence upon one another with the crew of a bomber or a submarine. And as we drew to a standstill, 3 laughing young men in jaunty black berets climbed out and leapt to the ground. "Rotten shooting, Jack," said the loader. "Not so bad," said Jack. I think we should have made it." The driver rolled round and lit a cigarette. "Did you hit anything?" he asked, innocently. "No, but you did," they replied. "I suppose you had to take us through that pond twice just to show you what a blinking awful driver you are." And as they stood chipping one another, I thought to myself, here we have Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who I have heard of, but I couldn't tell you who they are, some characters. Anyway, pause there for a moment just to see how we're all doing. Hello to Andrew Norris. What ho, Vobsters, to First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. There we go. Hello, Julia. Who else we got who has come? Trev. Hello, Richard, Julia, and everyone else listening. Lovely to have you on board. Just have a slurp of my coffee, if that's all right. There's some pictures here if you want to have a gander at the pictures. There's a bloke inside a tank. I hope you can see that. And there's some tanks driving along. Oops. What was the other picture? There wasn't really. That was it. I was up and out of Salisbury before the mists were off the field. My next call was upon the Navy at Weymouth. The instant war was declared, contraband bases were established round the coast where all ships must submit to examination in order that any cargo destined for the enemy may be inspected and, if necessary, seized. This is the legal way of blockading a country by stop and search. There are other methods as practiced by German. There are other methods as practiced by German submarines. I.e., blowing boats out of the water. Our 3 contraband bases are at Kirkwall in the Orkneys, at Ramsgate and Weymouth, which between them bottle up the North Sea. Kirkwall and Ramsgate are compulsory contraband bases. That's to say, cargo boats bound for Germany or neighbouring neutral countries are stopped at sea by British warships and are taken into these 2 ports for examination, whether they like it or not. Weymouth, on the other hand, is a voluntary base. Ships put in there for examination of their own accord. There is no compulsion about it, but many prefer to do this because it saves time, and the Navy sends them on their way with a few friendly tips about minefields and other matters which mariners discuss in times of war. I travelled south through Blandford and Dorchester, and was soon looking at the Grand Bay, whose sands in happier years I have seen dotted with children. There was now hardly a soul to be seen. But Weymouth Bay was full of ships of every type and nation, ships big and small, rich and poor, old and young, all anchored, waiting the pleasure of His Majesty's Navy. The headquarters of the control are in an old hotel near the waterside, which has probably not known such activity since stagecoaches arrived there in the last century. A naval guard was posted on the steps, and in the rooms upstairs naval officers sat at tables, writing, typing, telephoning, operating telegrams, and consulting the charts which covered all the walls. Glancing through the window, I saw, moored to a jetty, a small motor launch and 2 Lowestoft drifters, painted grey, ready at a signal to cast off and visit the League of Nations in the bay. Half the officers were Royal Navy and half were RNVR. What's RN? Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve or something? All of them wore war ribbons. I could see at once that this is the secret of the contraband control, that this organisation is a fine collaboration between the Navy and the mercantile marine. We should all be helpless without officers without experience. We should all be helpless without officers with experience of the merchant service, said a naval commander. They know all about the ship's papers and cargoes, and there's nothing you can tell them about the kind of thing a tramp skipper or a purser is trying to put across. They've developed a wonderful nose for contraband. It's a pleasure to see them on a strong scent. And some of the scents are pretty strong, I can tell you, put in a lieutenant, glancing up from his papers. Come out with us before breakfast and board tramps that have been 14 days in the Atlantic. You all served in the last war, I see. Yes, We're all dugouts. I was stockbroking before the war. One of the officers was chicken farming. Another was in the Bank of England. Another had a most peculiar calling, if you can believe him. He grew willows for cricket bats. And here we're all back in uniform. And what does it feel like? Well, at first it was a bit strange, but we've snapped back into it, and anyhow, we're too busy to analyse our emotions. I suppose you noticed the bays as you came in? Well, that's a nice little packet to unwrap and pack up again and send on its way with our blessing. The procedure is simple and effective. As soon as a ship anchors, 2 officers of the control, known as a boarding party, go out to her, apologising to the captain for being such a nuisance, and return to shore with the ship's manifest or list of cargo. This is teleprinted to the Ministry of Economic Warfare in London from a specially fitted room in the hotel. Sometimes a reply comes almost at once, instructing the control to release the ship. If the cargo or part of it is suspect, a search party of Navy ratings goes aboard and descends into the holds, and once again the teleprinter reports to London. If everything is above board, the ship is released. If not, orders are given to seize the cargo and take the ship to a specific port for its unloading. When this happens, an armed guard is sent aboard, officers with revolvers at their waists and sailors with rifles and fixed bayonets. Politely but firmly, the British Navy instructs the captain to make for Liverpool, Hull, Bristol, or wherever his particular cargo is to be landed. Don't the skippers get rather angry? I asked. Strangely enough, only British skippers. The neutral captains all seem anxious to help. They know we're doing a difficult job as quickly as we can, and with no danger to the safety of their ship and the lives of their crews. It is admittedly inconvenient for a ship, particularly if she's carrying passengers, to be held up sometimes for weeks or 10 days while London negotiates with the embassy of a foreign power to make absolutely certain that a suspected cargo is not going to Germany, but they take it in good part. No, neither passengers nor crews are allowed to land. The ship must lie at anchor and wait until we release her or escort her elsewhere. The passengers must get restive. Yes, sometimes they do. They get very tired of playing deck tennis at anchor. In one case, we had to hold up a liner for a long time. She transferred her passengers to another ship of the same line, whose release came earlier, and sent them on their way. In the room of the commanding officer hangs a list of all the ships examined in Weymouth since the outbreak of war. It contains the name and nationality of the ship, the cargo it carried, what action was taken, and remarks. Some of the remarks are interesting, such as sighted conning tower of submarine, or report striking submerged object. I also like the implied drama in the following: ship's name changed 3 times, encountered submarine, passenger wants to land. Among the nationalities examined are Greeks, Norwegians, Romanians, Jugoslavs, Portuguese, Danish, Italian, Dutch, American, and, of course, all British ships plying to neutral ports. I left the contraband control full of admiration for the way it does its difficult job. It is a carry-over from the last war. Otherwise, such an organisation could never have sprung fully experienced into action. In the first 7 weeks of war, the control has seized 400,000 tons of merchandise from the enemy, and in doing so, not one life has been lost and not one ship destroyed. Gosh. So you don't see, that's interesting because you don't really think about those sort of things, all that stuff that's going from various places. Andrew Norris says, I got a note from the post office that there's a package to collect tomorrow. Oh ho! That's taken a while. But yes, that will be the sweatshirt. Looking forward to a video with you wearing it, young Andrew Norris. which is great. I'm not sure I'd like to be in a tank, says Turbo Stream. No, I think I would absolutely hate being in a tank, or hated to have been in a tank, especially in battle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm enjoying Voby at work today. Now I have been unfurloughed. Oh, yes. Oh, what do you mean? You're enjoying Voby? Oh, at work. Not me at work. You're enjoying me while you are at work. I get it. Now that you've been unfurloughed. Ah, yes. Trev's Travels says, I was in a tank on Salisbury Plain once in an army open day for supplies. I've actually, I've got a podcast where I drove a tank, and Georgie, bless her, my daughter, who was about 12, was commentating. Commenting. Why does that sound wrong? She was commentating. She was giving a running monologue. Why does that sound wrong? Commentating. Is that right? That sounds wrong, but I can't think comment. No, she was commenting, but she was, when you giving a commentary. Commentate. Yeah, whatever. And sometimes I confuse myself. I don't know that it's sometimes. I think it's all the time. Anyway, I did a podcast driving a tank. They look like chieftain tanks. Are they modernish photos? Yes. This guy... So there's a guy called Tommy Candler. So the book was written in 1939, but it was photographed 50 years on, revisited and photographed 50 years on by this Tommy Candler. So yeah, most of these are sort of modern pictures of the places, what they look like now, when this was published in the 80s, I think. Something like that. Poor old Linda Kane has been... not very well. I baked some bread and she ate it, and she's been ill. No, I don't think that's true. I think she said it was very nice. Thank you very much. I was just mucking about. You're mucking about. I know. I'd overstayed my time in Weymouth, and I had to race up to Gloucestershire as quickly as I could. I hurried through Sherborne, Shepton Mallet and Bath, arriving in Gloucester in the first moments of the blackout. During that long run through a lovely portion of England, I thought at once, you leave towns and cities, it is difficult to believe that, as you leave towns and cities, it's difficult to believe you're at war. The villagers of England had not taken much interest in gas-proof rooms, gummed paper for windows, or ARP. The shops were full of every kind of food, and only the presence of obvious townspeople, women and children in remote parts of the country indicated the enormous social upheaval that was going on. In the public house between Frome and Bath, where I paused a moment for a sandwich, the tap room was full of the usual country characters, all talking about the war and listening to the BBC news bulletin. Until the war, the names of BBC announcers had never been divulged, but as soon as war was declared, these gentlemen owned the best-known names in England. At first the phrases, "and this is Frank Phillips reading it," was startling and extraordinary, as if the Times leader had been signed. This is the BBC, and this is Frank Phillips reading it. Oh, and here is the news. This is Richard Vobes reading it. Today in Germany, 3 men have been sighted getting into a Messerschmitt. The countrymen in this tavern took the war light-heartedly and thought of our chaps, let alone the French, would soon give old Hitler a bit of stick. One man had a boy in the gunners in France, but he wasn't allowed to say much about his letters home. His father didn't know where he was, but it was like that in the last war, wasn't it? Then the talk turned to the evacuees from the city. Mrs. Higgins had been given a couple of children who had never, apparently, had a bath in their lives, and so ragged and out of heels were they that they had been reclothed by their foster mother. There was some ill feeling, too, that strange women from the cities were in the habit of coming into the tap room in the evening and drinking half a pint, or even gin, like a man. Such a thing had never happened before in the village, and no one liked it. I became aware of a strange breach between town and village. A youngish man related with obvious gusto and pleasure the fact that certain townsfolk billeted in a neighbouring parish were worse than beasts in their habits. In other towns, they had always affected to look down on the countryman as a crude bumpkin. And in the presence of those slick townsmen, many a villager had at some time or other felt himself clumsy and rude. But now at last the great illusion had been shown up, and the town dweller revealed his true, insanitary colours. Would you believe it? Few, if any, of the villagers had heard an air raid siren blown in earnest, and the lack of shelters proved what they thought of the danger from air attack. The air raid wardens had eventually fitted everyone with gas masks and warned them not to let their children play with them. Such things were clearly the idiosyncrasies of a paternal government and would never be wanted. What was really important were the decisions of the local War Agricultural Committee, with its ploughing up campaign and its threat to take over Farmer Brown's farm because he was making a mess of it, as he'd always done. The war was far away from rural England. And that's actually quite true. I remember reading when I was writing or researching, and I did start writing a children's book called Blue Skies and Vapour Trails, which I was writing. It was really a children's book, but it was sort of written in a grown-up style for children, but, grown-up children, I suppose. And my story was all about the War Ag, or the War Agricultural Committee, who were forcing this farm to grow things that he knew wouldn't grow in certain places. And at the beginning of the story, unfortunately, a Messerschmitt comes over and is chasing a hurricane, and the hurricane avoids it, but and shoots the Messerschmitt, and the Messerschmitt is hit and it's coming down. But before he goes, he shoots down at this farm, and the mother of the girl who's the heroine of my book is killed quite right at the beginning. And it's quite not graphic, but it's quite. Well, I wanted to kill off the mother so that the father would be on his own with these two children, and examine how a father had relied on his mother, and now she was dead and they were in the war, and then he's got the war ag on his neck saying you've got to grow potatoes here, and he's saying, well, they won't grow there, that's just the wrong kind of soil and stuff, it's boggy and what have you. And in my story he begins to drink, and of course my mother used to drink, so I brought that in, and it was calling on my knowledge of what that was like. And then these children who were at sort of 10, 11, 12 were doing all this work which they had seen their parents do and had helped, and they were trying to help Dad to keep the farm going, and of course some of his workers had decided to go, and then eventually we get a land girl come who he doesn't want, but she is brilliant. And anyway, the story goes on, but it was there was a lot to do with. I've pretty much got a first draft all the way written, and I have read bits out on my Naked Englishman podcast a few years ago. But I must finish it, because it was the idea was I started writing it in 2017, and the idea was to publish it this year. Well, I got doing my YouTube videos, didn't I? And then it never got finished, because this would be 80 years, and I thought that would tie in quite nicely. So it was supposed to be finished and published this year, but I knew there was no money in children's books or writing. You've got to be so lucky, and also you've got to be good, and my skills aren't that good. What have we got? Cynthia Pate, greetings from Alabama. So happy to make it back to a live reading. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Lovely to see you. Weymouth Bay is full of cruise liners, says at this moment, says Graham Roffey. Oh, is it? Afternoon, Linda. Travel narrating. Paul Southgate. At least the pubs were open back then. Yes, at least the pubs were open. Sorry if you're under the weather, Linda. Google Images brings up photos of HV Morton. Haven't been able to find one of A.S. Cook. Yeah, I don't know. Well, when was he around? I've forgotten when Cook was around now. When was he around? Oh, he died in 1919, didn't he? Sounds an interesting book. Yeah, I must finish it. It was. I didn't want to shy away from the fact that war was a hard thing, but it takes place in Sussex. And a part of my also was that it's about being on the front line as civilians. So there is a sort of Tangmere. It wasn't Tangmere, but I make up a aerodrome that's nearby. So there's RAF people in blue driving about. And they're in the farm, and they have water, but they don't have electricity. Because not everyone had electricity. The nearest phone is in the village. They don't have a radio, so they go to the pub or the post office. I can't remember now where they listen, because it starts with the announcement with, the Chamberlain saying no such undertaking has been done, and therefore we're at war. And the siren goes off, and the kids, and the parents are panicking, thinking they're going to be bombed. This was on the 3rd of September, 80 years ago. Last year, 80 years ago. And the parents are panicking, and the kids pick up sticks and pretend to be soldiers, because that's what kids would do. I must finish it. Yeah, no, I must finish it. I'm fine, Richard. Straight face to camera as ever. The bread was very good. Even my sister, who I saw this afternoon, agreed, especially with the strawberry jam. Oh, I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. Next time, whenever I make you another loaf, I will do a whole meal one, because I know you like dense bread. Yeah, I must. It's just finding time, because you really have to concentrate when you're writing. And there were lots of, I'm very proud of the research and everything that I did to do in it. I mean, I've got some other books which, taught me how to write a bit. I'm not saying I'm any good at it. But there were lots of interesting elements in the story. And I wanted to learn about the agricultural farming, of course, of the time and all of that. And I was reading all sorts of interesting stuff. I'm just looking now. There was this, because also there was I had a little bit of everything. There's an unexploded bomb that's landed. It's landed in the church, and the girl is. It's drama, isn't it? A bomb lands in the church. Some bombs blow up, and everyone runs into the village to see what damage has happened. And there's a bomb that's in the church, and it's gone down about 12 feet. And it's a timed bomb. And this was because I read a book about unexploded bombs, and the story of the unexploded bombs was fascinating, because the bomb technology was just advancing pretty much month on month, so the first few bombs would just blow up, and then they would have bombs which, they had to have them so that they would blow up when they hit the ground rather than just hit the ground and not do anything. So they had all these different Heath Robinson gadgets in the bombs, and then they started to be very mean, because a bomb would drop and you'd think it was a dud, and you'd go to it and then it would blow up. And there were certain bombs with certain symbols on, because they were being manufactured, and the whatever you call it now, I forgot what you call it, the trigger thing, these timers and stuff, and they would have certain code symbols on them so that the bomb squad would come in. And then, of course, they changed it. This is the Germans. And the Brits would work out, oh, if it had an R and a 1 on it, for example, they would know that it was a 3-hour bomb. If it landed and it got this particular insignia, whatever it was, I can't remember, it would blow up in about 3 hours' time. Just enough time for people to sort of gather around and have a look and bang. And then they would change that and they would give it the same number. So people thought it was 3 hours, but actually it would blow up in 1. So they would think they got plenty of time, and they were just absolute bastards. And in my story, this bomb goes down into the church and it sort of gets dislodged into the crypt. So it hits the ground and it gets down into the crypt. And it's in such a precarious way, a man can't get to it. But because my heroine is this 12-year-old girl and she just happens to be loitering to look, she gets, they lower her down and they just want to know what the number is on, if you can identify that she hasn't got to touch it, but mustn't touch it. She's just got to identify the number. And so they're doing all this. Meanwhile, the father, who's come back drunk, knows his daughter's in town, and he's like, drunkenly, oh, you can't do this, you can't do this. And it's sad as well. There's moments of sadness because I didn't want to go away, so she becomes friendly with one of the soldiers, but unfortunately they think they're okay and they're trundling this bomb across the field to detonate it, but they've got to get it far enough away. But before it gets to the middle of the field, it goes off, and the 5 guys doing it, or the 3 guys, or whatever, they all get killed, and one of them is this guy. And it's very emotional, actually. I'm just feeling emotional about just talking about these invisible characters who don't live, but they're real people in my head. Anyway, I must do a bit more reading. Are you sure it's not his son wearing the army uniform? Yeah, that is his son, isn't it? When I first... Yes, that's the son. I haven't found that, although I guess he was living in Brighton. The son is the one in army uniform. The first image that comes up for me is Richard. Right, anyway... We've nearly come to the end of time. Sorry, I've waffled on about my silly book. I found a room at the New Inn at Gloucester. It was always old-fashioned, with its gallery and central courtyard. But that evening, as darkness fell, it sank right back into the early Middle Ages. It became, in the blackout, a labyrinth of rambling, gloomy, ill-lit passages, an autumn mist floating about in the darkness and hanging in the faint glow of blue ARP lamps. I groped my way from the bedroom to the gallery, descended to the outside stair, and crossed the inn yard to the dining room. There was a heavy black curtain to pull. There was a scene of warmth and good cheer, all the brighter for the horrible chill mist that lay over Gloucester. Waitresses were bustling about with a good dinner. Kidney soup, boiled turbot, roast duck and apple sauce, fruit salad and gorgonzola cheese. Gorgonzola? You don't hear much about gorgonzola. Does people still eat gorgonzola cheese? After dinner I went out with the idea of finding my way to the cathedral, for I had remembered the exquisite beauty of Salisbury Cathedral in the blackout. But there was no moon over Gloucester that night. The streets were black as ink, and I found it almost impossible to cross the road. The pavements were crowded with young people walking up and down, surging, singing, catcalling and whistling. The girls walked together in 2s or 3s, and the young men in groups, jostling each other, giggling and generally attempting, without realising it, to obey the laws of selection. This Stygian parade extended only to the length of the main street, but soon after 10 o'clock the young people vanished, and a welcome silence settled down on Gloucester. I've no idea whether blackout is always as sociable there, or whether I happened to strike a night when the combined youth of the city had decided to go out and become acquainted, or to snub each other, or to strike matches into each other's faces, and to wrestle in shop doors with shrill cries of, "Oh, isn't it awful?" or "Isn't he?" or "Oh, isn't he awful? But I like him." Dick Emery. I'm stronger than what you are. Whatever the reason, Gloucester had turned the blackout into a sombre Saturnalia. I never saw the cathedral, for I was unable to find my way there in the dark. I was glad to grope my way back to the more medieval darkness and sanctuary of the New Inn. There's quite a long bit next, and I might pause there if that's okay. Sorry, I was waffling a bit in today's thing. I might pause there because this one is quite a lengthy bit, and we're 10 to 5, and I need to finish the edit for tomorrow, and then I've got a Vogue show, and I've got to light the SE and do some other stuff. So as ever, very busy. Very busy. But so we'll pick up there. We have about a quarter of the book to go. So that's pretty good. That is pretty good. So yeah, I'm going to pause there. Sorry about that. But hopefully that's okay. And we will read some more tomorrow, which would be nice. What have we got here? I looked at Find a Grave, nothing. Oh, people are talking about Arthur, what's the name? I think Tesco's and Morrison still send Gorgonzola. Do you know, I've just not heard that. As soon as I saw that name, it's an amazing name, isn't it? Gorgonzola cheese. I have never, what was I going to say? I've never tasted Gorgonzola. I can't picture it. I've heard the name, of course. Good to hear. Turbo Stream says your book sounds good. Thank you very much. I just need to... I'm off to wake up next door's cat, which is sleeping in my study. Give it a good poke with a stick. I'm sure it'll be fine. Anyway, there we go. I must go and sort some stuff out now. But thank you so much for coming along. Good to start up another week. And yes, I'll think on about the travels. The channels, rather, whether to put this on another channel or not at some point. But we'll get to the end of this book first. All right, take care. Thank you very much. And I will see you at, tonight at 8 if you're on for that, or otherwise at 4 tomorrow afternoon for a live, or the fourth part of In Search of Sussex, Chapter 4, Off the Beaten Track, all that nonsense, will be up tomorrow morning from 4 o'clock. There you go. Look after yourself. Thanks very much. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.